too heavy to dance with. That's my overall impression of the Yamaha Ténéré 700. These are the specs, but let's not care about them and instead talk about how it feels as a rider and owner. The bike looks disproportionate, asymmetrical, and without a face. It's top-heavy and doesn't feel and sound special when riding. Has some serious quality control issues, and not very easy to do the maintenance yourself. So we have these 4 criteria to review this bike, and based on them, I give the bike the rating of 3.7 out of 10. This rating shows how much the company had the consumer in mind when designing the motorcycle. Now let's dig deeper into the 4 criteria and see why 3.7 out of 10. First, let's talk about how it feels to use the motorcycle. One of the first things that you feel when you start using the bike is that the motorcycle feels top heavy. The bike weighs about 460 pounds stock, and so it's not too heavy compared to other motorcycles. So the problem is not just weight, but the way the weight is distributed. Look at the location of the cylinders and its height. It's very high from the ground, and you don't see much weight sitting low in the engine compartment to balance that weight. This makes it difficult to move the bike in and out of the garage, difficult to control in low speed, and if you want to pick up the fallen bike. The next problem that's relevant to the last one is that the bike is not good for cruising in faster speeds. And by faster, I mean more than 50 or 60 miles per hour. Because the bike sits too high, it creates a big side area susceptible to wind from the sides. And with minimal wind protection, when you ride faster than 50 or 60 miles per hour, you feel the wind very hard. Being top heavy also hurts the rider here. It feels like the wind tries to topple the bike. Just for a moment, imagine you have an object like this glass that has most of its weight at the bottom. A hard wind can't do much to it. But if the weight is at the top, the same wind can easily topple the glass over. And that's exactly how it feels when controlling the motorcycle in higher speeds. Also, the gearbox is not designed for higher speeds. The distances between gears are very short, and as you can see in the motorcycle manual, it's recommended to shift up to the last gear only at 37 miles per hour. And I can confirm that. So for faster speeds, you will be in the same 6th gear from 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 miles per hour and more, which feels like you're dragging the engine, which feels tired by that speed. The problem is that the bike is not good for slow cruising either. For cruising less than 50 to 60 miles per hour or in town, you constantly need to change the gears because of the low distance between the gears. The 6th gear does not help much and instead makes you change the gear even more often. This is in addition to being top heavy that makes in-town riding and turning more difficult. The same problem applies when you want to ride the bike in dirt. It may work for riding in easy dirt and gravel, but for more serious off-road riding, it is just too heavy. The Ténéré is not a beginner-friendly motorcycle by any means. Because of being top-heavy and the seat height, in turns and in low speeds, there is much chance of falling with the motorcycle. The next one is that the bike doesn't feel special when riding. This is a more difficult and serious problem, especially for more experienced riders. It's the engine, exhaust, gearbox, power, and other factors that makes the bike feel bland. On the bright side for use, the Ténéré 700 had a good handling. The rider feels well in control of twists and turns in terms of handling. So in the use department, as we can see, the weaknesses outweigh the strengths significantly. And because of that, it receives 3 out of 10. Now we're going to talk about build quality. And in that domain, the first quality issue that I encountered was that the brake caliper was touching on the brake disc on the front wheel. To make the matter clear for everyone, here's the front wheel, and here's the caliper that's fixed when the wheel is turning. And here's the disc that's attached to the wheel and turned with the wheel. Look at this photo for a better view. The disc turns with the wheel, and when you press the brakes, within the caliper, the 2 brake pads press on the disc to stop the wheel. So when you're not braking, the disc should freely spin inside the caliper through this narrow opening. So back to our Ténéré, you can see the disc that spins, the caliper that's fixed, and the gap that should allow the disc to spin when not braking. The problem with my bike was that the disc was touching on one side of the caliper. As you can see, the gap exists, but the disc was leaning towards one side and was touching the caliper. This could damage and burn the disc and the caliper. It was not due to the wheel alignment and was just a mistake in measurements for placing the disc properly inside the caliper. I tried everything and nothing worked except opening the caliper and using a file to scratch the opening of the caliper and make it wider for the disc to spin freely. You can find other people online complaining about the same exact issue. The next build quality issue is that the bike has a lot of plastic parts like front fender, hand covers, mirrors, and other body parts such as chain cover and rear end. I'm not against using plastic, and to be fair, many of the plastic parts in this bike match well with its style. But the plastic should be used wisely, and some plastic materials in the bike felt low quality and brittle that could snap. For example, once I opened the engine oil filler cap, that's plastic, and dropped it on the ground from a few inches of distance, and the plastic on the top section snapped. I also dropped the bike once very gently on a gravel road, and it scratched the plastic on the mirror and the hand cover. It all shows that these plastic parts were cheaply made. Radiator joints are also plastic. That's not a good sign, as the internal combustion engine industry should learn not to use plastic for radiator joints. On the bright side of the build quality, during my 7 months of ownership, I had no mechanical issues with the bike. That, to be fair, should be the case. The bike seemed and felt pretty reliable for key components like engine, gearbox, and the electronics. So, all in all, for build quality, the bike receives 4 out of 10. Now, let's talk a little bit about maintenance. The first problem with the bike is that it does not come with a center stand in a stock form. Not having a center stand makes it difficult to do the service and maintenance, and so you either should buy an aftermarket and do the installations, or buy a separate jack lift or stand. The next problem is that to get to the cylinder heads, you need to open and separate a lot of parts. So you don't have an easy access to spark plugs and other items near the cylinder heads. Just looking at the bike from the side shows you that a lot of stuff is going on in the engine compartment. I also found a number of mistakes in the user manual. For example, there are 2 mistakes in the adjustments of the front forks. The first is in the rebound damping setting, and the minimum number should be 31 clicks instead of 17 that's in the manual. And the second mistake is in the compression damping setting that should be 22 clicks instead of 19. Also, the engine oil drain bolt tightening torque number is unusually high at 43 Newton meters. I don't think any other motorcycle or even trucks have such a high tightening torque for their oil drain bolt. These mistakes are what I found, and it's unclear how many more mistakes exist in the manual. Such mistakes would definitely hurt the owner's trust in the information in the manual. The Ténéré has two parts for the seat. The rear part opens with the key, but to open the front part, that's the main part, and access the tools, you need a hex key wrench. But without opening the front part, how do you have the wrench? So you need to carry the wrench with yourself or attach it somewhere in the motorcycle to be able to open the front part. Another thing that may not be directly relevant to the maintenance is that there is no official fuel consumption information from Yamaha. I've been checking their website for years and it's always been to be determined. Online search of owners would tell you numbers from 38 to 65 miles per gallon, which is a large range, and you basically have no idea about the fuel consumption before owning, using, and measuring yourself. Hiding this information from the public seems intentional from Yamaha and is an indication of not being straightforward with the potential customers. On the bright side, the preload adjustment is very easy and doesn't require tools. You just need to spin the cone-shaped head with your hand. The maintenance intervals are also good, and you won't have to do the difficult things like valve adjustments too often. This is expected from a liquid-cooled motorcycle. The oil change intervals are also reasonable. So for maintenance, based on these results, the motorcycle receives 4 out of 10. Finally, let's talk a little bit about external design and looks. Before going into details in this subject, I need to mention that there are no hard principles of how to make a product look better aesthetically. So the discussion can be subjective and controversial. But there are certain general principles in product design that can contribute to the aesthetics, such as symmetry and unity in design. So I'm going to do my best and stay close to these general principles here. Now back to our discussion, the Ténéré looks as a whole disproportionate and not smooth. Engine compartment up to the tank and handlebars are much chunkier than the rear parts. Let's look at the bike from the top. It's much slimmer in the rear than the front. And the area below and around the tank is big. Also, the bike doesn't have a face with those 4 small LED lights on the front. Human eye has a tendency to assign front face to shapes in many categories, including motorcycles. For example, that's why a bike like this looks like missing something on the front, but this one looks complete. That's the problem with the Ténéré, not having a unified face. Also, is the holistic external design structure following a specific shape? Is it square? Is it circle? It is not clear. So the shape of things like turn signals doesn't make much sense. Why isn't it square? Why not round? Why not a different shape? The next finding is that the external design is asymmetrical, one of the first principles of aesthetics in product design. If you look at the Ténéré from one side, it's not the same from the other side. And one of the main reasons is the exhaust pipe that's on the right side of the motorcycle. I'm sure you're familiar with motorcycles with even number of cylinders that have their exhaust pipes on both sides of the motorcycle. Let's now talk about the seat height. You have to be taller than 6 feet. Now you see me with 6 feet and 2 inches, and I'm just tall enough to be flat-footed on the bike. Shorter riders that constitute the majority of the public have difficulty riding the Ténéré. When you buy the Ténéré new, there are no rear hand grips. What you see here is an aftermarket that I installed on the bike. They're useful for fastening the straps of rear bags or moving the bike around. They're also much better for a rear passenger to hold on to compared to what the bike has in the stock for. Let's talk about the placement of the exhaust on the bike. The exhaust sticks out too much on the right side of the bike and is attached to the frame. Drop the bike from the right side and you might not only damage your exhaust, but bend the frame. So you have to be careful not to drop the bike on the right side. On the bright side, the bike looks rugged. With the knobby tires, it looks tough and athletically rugged. And the bike has a stock engine plate. It's well designed and hard enough to protect the bottom of the engine. So in the external design and looks department, we have some weaknesses and some strengths. And based on them, the bike receives 4 out of 10 for external design and looks. And that's how, based on these 4 categories of criteria, the Ténéré 700 receives the overall consumer centricity rating of 3.7.